NAMA was set up by the Irish government to help get the banks functioning again. At least that was the theory. The idea was that all three major banks had made huge loans to developers, and that these loans were basically non-performing, and that the banks were paralysed because of it. So the idea was that NAMA would be sort of a super bank that would take on the top loans out of all three banks at a discount, because the loans have been given for property and development at an excessive price. If you look at, let's say, house prices, and the same thing affects all sorts of properties, they're now around 50% of what they used to be. So people who borrowed money spent it on assets which were no longer worth that. So the idea was that the banks would function. But alas for the government and for the Irish people, when they started looking at the banks, they discovered that the hole in the finances of the banks was much, much worse than was realised. And NAMA took over these loans at a discount of 50-60%, which is a huge burden, and that the banks themselves now are strapped for cash and can't really function as banks. The IMF, properly called the International Monetary Fund, is part of three or four institutions that were set up after the Second World War to stop things like the Great Crash of 1929 happening, to help countries that had run up huge debts and couldn't get loans to finance imports for food, everything. It's commonly called a bailout, but it's actually like a huge big overdraft facility of what, 90 billion euros. And the money comes from about three, maybe four different sources. One source is the IMF itself. The other part is the European Union, or various institutions that have been set up by the European Union. There was a fund set up when Greece crashed, and we are now accessing that fund. We're also accessing another fund. So I think it comes from three different sources with three different interest rates. What makes the problem really, really bad is that the banks borrowed money, one off depositors, but two off other banks and big institutions abroad. Now, the normal case if a business goes broke is that people end up, if they're not secure creditors, end up with only a little bit of what they've lent to business. But for some bizarre reason, the Irish government has decided that secured bondholders will be paid in full. In other words, we're bailing out the Irish banks to save other European banks who lent to the Irish banks.